nation is waiting with bated breath to see if Republicans, or even a single Republican for that matter, will come out against racism today. It's not hard, at least it should not be hard, to lend your name and your vote to a resolution that says immigrants make America stronger, that America still welcomes those who lawfully seek refuge from violence in their home countries, and that Donald Trump's racist attacks on 4 female members of Congress deserve universal condemnation. That vote, scheduled for just a few hours from now, does not at this moment have any public support from elected Republicans. We have not found one elected Republican who has said that he or she will vote for that resolution, which means the party of Donald Trump, that is now the party of grab him in the bleep, will now also officially be a party that turns a blind eye to racist attacks from the president on fellow lawmakers. On day 3 of what the White House and Fox News would have you believe is a winning strategy against 4 women of color and every American offended by the defiance of Trump's racism, as much as the meanness at its core, it's worth reminding everyone, and maybe some of those Republican fence-sitters, that they used to care about Trump's racist attacks. Here are 4 current sitting elected Republicans condemning Trump's racially charged comments on the 2016 campaign trail.
He's a race-baiting, xenophobic, religious bigot. He doesn't represent my party. He doesn't represent the values that the men and women who wear the uniform are fighting for.
Look, of course it's inappropriate to be attacking a federal judge's race or ethnicity.
Quite frankly, I'm very disturbed by the way he keeps referring to this judge, an American, born in Indiana, who he continues to raise issues about, and I hope he'll stop doing that.
I think a good place to start would be to apologize for the various totally inappropriate things he said over the last couple of weeks.
It'd be funny if it wasn't so tragic. That was just 3 short years ago when Republicans were still offended by racist attacks from this president. Presidential advisor Kellyanne Conway today piled on to the 4 congresswomen by calling them, quote, the dark underbelly of America. She also asked a reporter his ethnicity at a press availability and said she's sick and tired of this country, of America coming last. Listen.
What's your ethnicity?
Why is that relevant?
No, because I'm asking you a question. My ancestors are from Ireland and Italy.
My own ethnicity is not relevant to the question I'm asking.
No, it is, because you're asking about, he said originally. He said originally from.
I am asking.
And you know everything he has said since, and to have a full conversation.
Are you saying that the president was telling the Palestinian...
The president's already commented on that.
Go back to occupied territory.
The president's already commented on that, and he said a lot about this since that one tweet. No, he's put out a lot of tweets, and he made himself available to all of you yesterday. Yes, he has. He's tired. A lot of us are sick and tired of this country, of America coming last, to people who swore an oath of office.
As a former White House staffer who stood in that spot and spoke on behalf of a president, I'm fairly confident that I would have been fired on the spot for demanding that a reporter disclose his or her ethnicity to me before I answer his question. But it's the response of Conway's husband, George Conway, to this moment in Trump's presidency that provides the best rebuke of the steaming hot hate speech spewing from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. George Conway writes this in today's Washington Post, quote, naivete, resentment, and outright racism roiled in a toxic mix have given us a racist president. By virtue of his office, he speaks for the country. What's at stake now is more important than judges or tax cuts or regulations or any policy issue of the day. What's at stake are the nation's ideals, its very soul. And that is where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. With us from the Washington Post, White House reporter Ashley Parker. With us on set, Tim O'Brien, executive editor for Bloomberg Opinion. Karine Jean-Pierre is back, senior advisor to MoveOn.org. And former chief spokesman for the Department of Justice, Matt Miller's here. But first, a special guest. Let's go to Capitol Hill. Congresswoman Karen Bass joins us, Democrat from California and chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. I'd love your thoughts on this vote, and are you as surprised as I am? Are you beyond surprised that there's not any Republican support for it at this moment?
Well, sadly, I'm not surprised at all, because they are so frightened of him that they have decided to essentially hand him their dignity, and their integrity. I look forward to taking this vote. It's so sad, though, that we seem to be here every few weeks. And the only thing that I could think of is that he decided to throw this bomb to divert us away from Mueller's impending hearing in a week, and also the failed raids that he said were going to take place. He always throws a racist bomb at a strategic time when he wants to divert our attention.
Congresswoman, do you believe that there's any danger in the constant stream of upping the ante that seems to come from this White House and this president? His words have a long tail. They're echoed in conservative media outlets. He had social media provocateurs at the White House last week and celebrated what are usually false attacks. One of them had put out a false attack against Senator Kamala Harris. Are you concerned that this debate is getting out of control?
Well, I absolutely am. And one of them also had put out a really anti-Semitic political cartoon as well. And he was welcomed into the White House. I will tell you that I am seriously worried about the lives of our 4 colleagues, 2 of which are members of the Congressional Black Caucus. But these 4 women go through death threats every single day. They don't talk about it very often. I'm very worried that one of them might be injured, if not killed. And you remember when the guy went in and shot up the synagogue, remember who he cited? He said that the president said that they were getting funding to encourage Central Americans to come over to the United States. I believe that his racist, hateful rhetoric absolutely has consequences. All he needs to do is trigger somebody who is mentally unstable or who is a bigger racist than he is, and somebody else is going to get hurt. I believe people have already been hurt because of his racist rhetoric.
Congresswoman, I just want to get you on the record and make sure that I understand exactly what you're saying. Do you believe that other than endangering the lives of these 4 congresswomen that he targeted in those racist tweets, do you believe he'd have blood on his hands if there were a racially inspired attack in this country? I
absolutely believe that, yes. But, remember now, before our last election, we had 4 acts of domestic terrorism. You remember the guy that delivered the bombs? Do you remember his van was covered in pro-Trump bumper stickers and posters? So I think that he's already had that effect. And I'm very, very concerned that it'll continue. I have been afraid for my colleagues' safety for a long time now. And I think what he did over this weekend just puts them in further danger.
Congresswoman, are I'm old enough to remember when there were 2 channels on Capitol Hill, the public sentiment and the private conversations. Are you able to speak privately with any Republicans about what you just shared on our air?
I have to tell you, sadly, typically they do come up and say, oh my God, what he said now. I've not heard that today. I haven't. None of them have come up and spoken to me the way they usually have. A lot of times they're embarrassed. They kind of hold their head down and say, I wish he would stop saying those things.
It's a remarkable decline, though. I mean, there are some people who think this was always the face and the heart of the Republican Party, but we showed that tape of just 3 years ago when he was running for president, Republicans who were walking those halls behind you, condemning racist attacks. Do you think the gender of these 4 congresswomen comes into play as well?
A caucus that has 199 members and 14 of which are women? Absolutely. I think gender is always front and center. But remember now, even more important than the rhetoric are the policies. And frankly, whether my colleagues would come up to me afterwards and kind of disassociate themselves with his rhetoric, their policies have been very consistent, and their policies absolutely have a disproportionate negative impact on communities of color.
Congresswoman, will you do me a favor and come on back if you have any news in the next 51 minutes or any inkling that Republicans in public or private would like to support this resolution tonight?
You know what? I'll go talk to a few right now on the floor. And if they tell me privately, I won't disclose their names, but I'm happy to come back on the air and tell you.
We'll keep their secret. Thank you so much for spending the time with us. We're grateful.
Absolutely.
Karine, I sit here, I write those words, I read those words, I ask those questions, I listen to the answers, and I'm never not shocked.
Yeah.
And that's where we are today in Trump's America. This is Trump's America. Yes, you know, Trump, racism, sexism, misogyny, xenophobia all existed before Trump, but he has done something to this country, and you see it with the Republican Party. He has normalized things that should never have been normalized. And the reason why is because he's sitting in the White House. He stands behind the podium and he tweets, right? He tweets within the residence of the White House, which is coming. All of this is coming from the President of the United States. You know, I was just thinking, listening to Karen Bass, who's the head of the chair of the CBC, the Congressional Black Caucus, and I was thinking that when it comes to black people in America, when it comes to people of color living in America, Donald Trump is nothing new. That's the thing that we have to remember. Yeah. He's nothing new. They have seen this, especially when I speak to older black people who've been around through Jim Crow, through the Civil Rights Movement. They saw Donald Trump coming a long time ago, in particular with the birtherism.
Yeah, and look, I don't want to get too sidetracked, but I don't want to skip over this point because when you look at the exit polling, black women were the smallest group of, I mean, I think like none voted for Donald Trump. And if you go out and ask them after the election, after 2016, the anecdotal evidence was that we all knew somebody like Donald Trump.
Exactly. We all knew. And going to today, right, one of the reasons Biden does so well in polling is because he's being propelled by the black community, right? And to your point, you talk about this all the time. When his announcement video, he took a 2x4, right, to the racism of Donald Trump. That really awakened people and said, yes, this is the person that could beat Donald Trump in their minds, because they know how dangerous Donald Trump is. They know the bigotry, the racism. They have seen this all of their lives. And that's where we are today. And that's when we say, oh no, we've seen this before, it's kind of sad to see that the Republican Party doesn't speak up, doesn't understand what's going on, because we have seen this before.
I want to get to some breaking news. Ashley Parker has been seated and mic'd and held our hostage, the hostage of the 4 p.m. since this news broke. So I don't want to put you on the spot, but I've just learned, Ashley, through our producers, our control room, that meeting this afternoon at the White House, scheduled at the White House with Republican leaders, has been canceled. Any sense as the afternoon sort of came into focus that meeting was up in the air, or any sense of what dynamics were at play or what concerns were playing out as the day went on?
To be perfectly honest, we just learned that as well, and I've sort of been glancing down at my phone trying to figure out what's going on, and other reporters at the Post are also kind of scrambling, but I don't have anything sort of brand new to add to, other than the fact that we know it has been postponed.
And actually, the president had to have been in a pretty good place in terms of either deafening silence from Capitol Hill or pretty muted critiques, mostly on Twitter, really not any dramatic television moments. We know he's particularly sensitive to those. And the Republicans that we played who were so concerned about racist attacks in 2016, to a person, silent.
It's true. And one thing that was striking to me was that there were a few Republican lawmakers yesterday who kind of came out, called the president's tweets and comments racist, and said he would apologize. And it was really, truly just a handful. I think I can name 3 off the top of my head. And that was kind of taken writ large as a sign that, you know, Republicans were really standing up to him. And if we're being honest, that's not really standing up to him at all. This is the party now, it's quite clear, of Donald Trump. And one thing that the president does is he sort of throws out these floaters just to see how much he can get away with and how far he can go. And the answer quite clearly now is very far. He can go very far on this with feeling very little pushback. And if you follow these past 3 days, as you and I have, this was in some ways intentional. The original tweets on Sunday were not intentional. People I talked to in the White House largely said they wish they hadn't happened. They weren't expecting them. They didn't know how exactly you try to message them away. But if you watch the president's behavior afterwards, the plan was, he had that sheet of paper. I talked to aides in the White House. The plan was for him to go out Monday and expand upon his remarks and to go out and sort of double and triple down and really try to paint these 4 women of color as villains, basically, that the Republican Party can and he can run against. And part of that, they will say we want to portray them as socialist, as outside of the mainstream. That generally Republicans think is a good argument. But what the president is also doing is portraying them as not us, as other, as people who, as he said, should go back to the countries from which they came. And that is a strategy he's done before, and one we expect to see through Election Day. It's quite clear, which is fanning the flames of racial animus in this nation to try to get elected to a second term.
Matt Miller, Ashley Parker is exactly right. Republicans did not stand up to Donald Trump, and I want to get to that, but I don't want to gloss over what we showed you from Kellyanne Conway. Yeah. I worked in the White House. I stood where she was standing, literally. I didn't just walk in her shoes. I stood on that spot, and I spoke for a president in a White House. And if I'd demanded that a reporter disclose his ethnicity before I respond to his question, I would have been fired by the time I made the short walk back to my desk.
And that ought to still be the case. But Kellyanne Conway, I think in this instance, is just an avatar for the entire rest of the Republican Party. Look, Donald Trump has always been a racist. His first entrance into public life in the 1980s with respect to the Central Park Five was based on racism. He started his career in national politics with birtherism, which was a racist idea. He ran as a racist. There were the Curiel comments. There were the rapist comments. Charlottesville in 2017. He's governed as a racist. The difference now is that essentially the entire Republican Party has embraced his racism. There has been such a change from in the 2016 campaign when you would have some Republicans, when he would make racist comments, say, that's a reason why I can't support him, to Charlottesville, where they would criticize him, but then kind of treat racism like it was just another issue, like deficit reduction or school choice or something. Well, I don't like his racism, but I like the tax cuts and I like the judges. They're not even there today. You've seen Republicans who have actually come out and backed him up. Senator Steve Daines of Montana backed him up and is attacking the 4 Democratic members of Congress. I think what's happened is, he has taken over the Republican Party, and they made this mistake of treating racism not as a disqualifier, but as another issue, and thinking they could just kind of bargain away his racism to now endorsing, going from bargaining it away to silence to now outright endorsing it. And I think it leaves you with the entire Republican Party basically governing in his shadow, and they'll be campaigning in his shadow in 2020.
So I think it was 2 weeks ago, Megan Twohey and her colleagues at the New York Times interviewed 2 women who corroborated E. Jean Carroll's account of Donald Trump raping her in a dressing room at Bergdorf. It's now 2 weeks later, and he's day 3 of launching a racist attack against 4 women of color who serve in the House. The chairwoman of the Congressional Black Caucus believes that he'll have blood on his hands if they or anyone else is injured in this spirit of racism. And the idea that is being peddled from the White House on and off the record, I'm sure Ashley knows better than me, is that this is smart politics. You saw Liz Cheney, go out there with her shoulder pads on, ready for tackling and blocking and attacking these women, attacking their politics. And Liz Cheney, I worked with Liz Cheney. She follows a playbook, a political playbook. It's in her DNA from her father. And the political playbook is to run on this. You want to talk about the dark underbelly of America? It's Donald Trump, and it's Liz Cheney, and it's everyone that's following his path. And here's the other thing. It's heinous. It's also idiotic politics. I mean, these are the headlines in swing states. I mean, you think you're going to win over anyone with Trump taps the toolkit of racism. Trump's racist tweets are an offense against America. Trump is truly America's bigot in chief. These aren't from MSNBC. This is from our website. These are from mainstream, objective editorial pages in America's newspapers.
This is smart politics if you're talking about a New York ward in 1890, where all you care about is this narrow strip of constituents that are going to get you reelected over and over. And right now, what Donald Trump is doing is he's pitching himself and his party into the arms of 36 million voters who apparently will let him fire a gun on Fifth Avenue and not care about it. But that kind of political thinking is completely divorced from great leadership and moral authority. The Republicans who were in the Senate in the Civil War era, they got beaten on the floor of the Senate. Abraham Lincoln was assassinated because that group of Republicans went to war to end slavery on a principle. And when we look back fondly at that party at that time, it's because they put their lives at risk over a principle. That's how we think about the New Deal generation and the greatest generation that fought World War II. Donald Trump is debasing the core values of his party. He's basing what are bipartisan American values about civility and mutual respect. And they're doing it to hold on to, I think, a narrow group of voters who feel lost and are easily swayed by appealing to their hatreds rather than to their higher virtues.
Ashley Parker, I talked to someone who saw the president recently who said he's feeling pretty good. And I said, really? And he said, yeah, but that is usually when he's the most dangerous to himself. What's this White House thinking about today's headlines, today's news environment?
Well, again, the White House, you mentioned Charlottesville earlier, and what was, again, striking to me was some people in the White House I was talking to sort of said, again, I wouldn't have made the comments the way the president did. I kind of wish we could move past them, ignore it, get onto a different news cycle. But they said internally, this does not feel like Charlottesville. These people are sort of not grappling with existential moral crises of what to do.
Why not?
That's just they just aren't. I sort of can't explain all of their reasons. One thing when you talk to them is there is a little bit of a numbing factor,
yeah.
right? The idea now that the president, and people have said this not necessarily specifically to this, but that the president will send out a tweet that is controversial and incendiary and offensive in some way and makes their jobs a lot more difficult is just something that comes with working at the White House, not dissimilar to badging in to the Pennsylvania Avenue complex. And so they have just become more used to it at this point. The other thing about how the president's feeling is one thing that's worth noting is when you talk to the campaign, when you talk to advisors, they try to claim, you know, that they're expanding the map, that they think they could maybe win New Mexico. They think they could maybe win Oregon. They're allegedly excited about these coalitions to make inroads with black voters, with Hispanic voters, with female voters. But that is not what the president's actions are showing, his rhetoric is showing, his tweets are showing, or frankly, where he's actually visiting so far when he goes to rallies.
Ashley Parker, the only person he's going to add is the unregistered next-door neighbor of David Duke, who's also a racist. He is not, you are absolutely right, he is not expanding his coalition. We are always glad to have you, but especially today. No one listens to those whispering walls in the West Wing better than you do. Thank you, my friend.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.